Ancient history has often been remembered through the lens of the Roman Empire, a civilization that towered over much of Europe and left a legacy so immense that it still shapes the modern world. The Romans seemed capable of anything they built. Colossal structures carved roads across the continent and commanded vast territories with unmatched discipline and organization. For centuries, they appeared unstoppable. Yet despite their power, there were clear limits to their expansion. One of the most puzzling questions is why Rome stopped where it did. Why did the mighty empire never conquer Germania? The absence of Germania from Rome's crown was not for lack of trying. For a time, Rome actively sought to bring the region under its influence. The Rhine River marked the frontier, and after Julius Caesar's conquests in Gaul, the lands beyond the river looked like the next logical step for imperial growth. Under Caesar Augustus, who reigned during the closing decades of the 1st century BC, the Romans had consolidated control in Gaul. By around 20 BC, Augustus was already preparing for a move eastwards. He fortified positions across the Rhinelands and considered the prospect of expanding into Germania, but even the best laid Roman plans were quickly tested. In 17 BC, 3 Germanic tribes, the Sicambri, the Usipetes, and the Tencteri, launched a sudden incursion across the Rhine into Roman territory. The attack clashed with the 5th Legion under Marcus Lollius, and the Germans emerged victorious. The defeat rattled Augustus. Rome had lost before, but not so close to home in newly secured Gaul. Instead of launching straight into Germania, Augustus took a step back. He prioritized strengthening Gaul, creating stronger defenses and ensuring order in the territories he already ruled. The Roman response was not entirely defensive, though. Soon after the initial clash, Lollius and his men forced the tribes back across the Rhine. A temporary peace followed, but the Romans understood the threat was far from over. For several years, Rome focused on stabilizing Gaul. Augustus introduced new systems like a census for taxation. This census, however, angered the local population and stirred discontent. In 13 BC, Nero Claudius, Drusus' stepson of Augustus, became governor of Gaul, tasked not only with managing rebellion, but also preparing the Rhine frontier for further expansion. He built forts and bolstered defenses, knowing Rome's ambitions were not finished. The first true test of Rome's renewed strength came when the Sicambri and Usipetes once again crossed into Roman lands. This time, Drusus repelled them and decided to take the fight across the river. His campaign was bold. He plundered tribal lands, advanced into modern-day Netherlands, routed the Frisians, and struck at the Chauci in what is now Saxony before returning to Roman territory. The invasion set the tone. Rome was not just defending its borders, but reaching deep into Germanic lands. In the following years, Drusus pushed even farther. He led expeditions between the Weser Ems and Elbe rivers. His armies advanced until winter shortages of supplies and harsh terrain forced them to retreat. On their return journey, the Romans barely avoided disaster when attacked by Germanic forces, but Drusus survived to fight again. In 10 BC, he launched yet another campaign, capturing territory from the Chatti and other tribes. A year later, he pushed forward, pillaging cities and spreading Roman influence. He was on the verge of becoming Rome's great conqueror of Germania, but fate intervened. On his return from yet another victory, Drusus fell from his horse. He lingered for weeks, but eventually died of his injuries, cutting short a career that might have changed history. Despite this setback, Rome did not abandon its ambitions. Tiberius, the brother of Drusus, took up the mantle. He launched campaigns that brought him great success, pushing through the Rhineland and forging alliances with several tribes. According to later accounts by Roman scholars, by this time many Germans between the Elbe and the Rhine had surrendered to Roman authority. The empire appeared on the verge of permanently subduing Germania. Tiberius built new military bases, secured friendships with tribes like the Cherusci, and expanded Roman authority without facing overwhelming resistance. One of those Cherusci nobles was a young man named Arminius. Raised in Rome as a hostage and trained in Roman military ways, he earned citizenship and trust. As an ally of Rome, he rose quickly in status. Tiberius favored him, and other Roman commanders relied on his advice. But beneath his loyalty, Arminius nurtured a deep resentment. He watched as Rome extended its grip over his homeland, and quietly began uniting tribes against their occupiers. While Rome celebrated its progress, new challenges arose. The Marcomanni, a powerful tribe under King Maroboduus, remained outside Roman influence. A major offensive was prepared to deal with them, but before it could take place, revolt broke out in Illyricum. Tiberius was forced to abandon the Germanic campaign and move to the Balkans. Leadership in Germania was handed to Publius Quinctilius Varus. He was given 3 legions, and to his great fortune or so, it seemed Arminius, as an advisor, Varus trusted Arminius completely. When news came of a rebellion supposedly threatening the region, Arminius advised Varus to march out immediately. Arminius' own father-in-law warned the Roman commander not to trust him. Insisting that the young chieftain was behind the uprising, Varus dismissed the warning, accusing the man of personal jealousy. He set out with his legions under the guidance of Arminius, who promised to lead them to the trouble spot. Instead, he guided them into a trap. The Roman column marched through difficult terrain. A narrow stretch of forest pressed them between hills and marshland. The path was only about 60 feet wide, barely enough for their baggage and animals, certainly not suited for battle formations. The soldiers were vulnerable, weighed down by supplies and stretched in a long line. At that moment, Arminius slipped away, claiming he needed to gather reinforcements. Instead, he called upon the army he had secretly assembled. With thousands of German warriors hidden in the woods, the trap was sprung. The ambush that followed became one of Rome's darkest days. German fighters rained down upon the unprepared legions. The Romans struggled to organize, but the terrain worked against them. Their formations were useless, and their enemy knew every Roman tactic. Arminius had been raised among them and understood their weaknesses. Casualties mounted as the soldiers fought desperately for survival. For 3 days, the slaughter continued. Commander Varus, realizing there was no escape, fell on his own sword. Many officers did the same. The rest were cut down or taken captive. By the end, 15,000 Roman soldiers were dead. The disaster at the Teutoburg Forest wiped Rome from the lands east of the Rhine. When news of the defeat reached Emperor Augustus, the shock was overwhelming. He was said to have torn at his hair, shouting, "Varus, give me back my legions." The invincible image of Rome was shattered. For the first time in generations, the empire recognized a frontier. It could not push beyond Augustus, abandoned dreams of conquering Germania. Though his nephew Germanicus later launched campaigns to avenge the loss, even defeating Arminius in battle, the Romans eventually pulled back. They recovered honor but not territory. The Rhine became the permanent border. The consequences of this disaster were profound. Germania remained outside Rome's direct control. The tribes there would never be Romanized as Gaul, Spain, or Britain had been. Instead, Germania became a source of constant tension. Over centuries, it produced warriors and leaders who later challenged the empire. Rome chose caution rather than conquest, because the risks outweighed the rewards. The forests, rivers, and fiercely independent tribes were obstacles too costly to overcome. Historians have long debated Rome's decision. Some argue the resources in Germania were simply not rich enough to justify the cost. Others point to the terrain, which made large-scale campaigning difficult. Still others emphasize the ferocity of the tribes who fought with relentless determination. Whatever the reasons, one fact is undeniable. The defeat at Teutoburg broke the illusion of Roman invincibility. Augustus and his successors learned that expansion had its limits. Even the most disciplined army in the world could stumble. When overconfident, Arminius, celebrated as a hero among his people, became a symbol of resistance. His betrayal of Rome ensured that Germania remained free, but his legacy was complex. Even among the tribes, he could not maintain unity. Internal divisions eventually weakened his power. Yet his triumph endured as a moment when local warriors stood against the greatest empire on earth and won. For Rome, the failure shaped centuries of policy. The empire focused on consolidating and protecting its existing borders rather than overextending into hostile terrain. The dream of pushing the empire deep into the heart of Germania was abandoned. Instead, Rome fortified the Rhine and the Danube, using them as natural barriers. The empire still fought wars with Germanic tribes, but never again attempted to fully annex their lands in the end. The question of why Rome never conquered Germania has a simple answer and a complicated one. At the simplest level, they tried and failed. At a deeper level, the cost of further attempts was too great. The defeat of Varus, the betrayal of Arminius, and the nightmare of Teutoburg Forest scarred the Roman psyche. Conquest was no longer worth the risk. The Romans left Germania beyond their grasp, and in doing so shaped the history of Europe for centuries to come.